All right, so I want to talk about bring your own device student response systems. I use one in my course, my undergraduate stats course. So I'm going to briefly introduce these BYOD response systems. They're classroom response systems. Talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of the BYOD response system and using one in a classroom. Some things to consider when you're choosing your BYOD response system. There's several out there. I'll kind of introduce those and talk with you a little bit about what you might want to think about if you're choosing one of those. And then my experience teaching undergrad stats with one of these BYOD response systems. So for a long time, the typical classroom response system where students could answer polling questions and the instructor could see sort of how students are doing on the polling questions. People used clickers, and so clickers were these little devices that students purchased at the bookstore, and they're still out there. People still use clickers today. They're relatively expensive for the students to buy, but if an instructor or multiple instructors are using them, then they can get their money's worth. Students can get their money's worth. So the clickers allow students to answer polling questions posed by the instructor during lecture, and it allows the instructor to collect data on student responses and kind of see real time, how students are understanding a particular concept, and sort of if that instructor needs to adapt his or her teaching during class based upon the responses. So a BYOD response system is a classroom response system, but it does not utilize clickers, so a student does not have to use a clicker. They can use their own personal electronic device, so they can use a laptop, a cell phone, a tablet, and those sort of things. And so some of the big time BYOD response systems on the market now offer a lot more features than just polling as well. Some just have polling, but others have other features, and we'll talk about that as we go on. So some advantages to using these BYOD response systems is what I've already said. Students don't have to buy the clickers. These clickers can be expensive, up to $70, $80 for the students to purchase. And also they have to remember to bring these clickers to class each time. And so that can be a problem for some students. What they don't forget is they don't forget their cell phone. And so students will have their cell phone with them and can use these BYOD response systems from their cell phone, and they're already familiar with their cell phone or familiar with their laptop, so there's not much of a learning curve associated with using them for this purpose. And most students, this probably varies by college, but most students should have a laptop or a smartphone to bring with them to class. So some disadvantages. Two main disadvantages here that people talk about. The biggest one from faculty is the fact that a lot of faculty do not want students to use personal devices in class. So I was one of them when I first started teaching. I did not allow any laptops, no cell phones, certainly no cell phones, but no laptops or tablets to be out. I really thought it was a distraction, not only for the student, but also for the students around that student that could be using that electronic device. So this was kind of a leap of faith to trust the people who had used these and said that it went well for them. And so it has gone well for me. I have found that allowing students to bring in and have their cell phones out has not created as much of a distraction as I initially thought it probably would. Students are very engaged because these BYOD response systems, as you'll see throughout the talk here, are very engaging, very interactive, so it keeps the students' attention. So I have not found this to be a problem. I do ask my students on the first day of class to please refrain from looking at social media and those sorts of things, and for the most part I don't seem to have many problems with that. The other problem is more of an infrastructure problem within the classroom or the university where you teach, and that is the wireless network. So these students will be connecting to the wireless network and utilizing that to answer these polling questions and other things that they'll be doing on this BYOD response system. And so you want to have a strong wireless network for that. So some of the available BYOD response systems out there, the big one is Poll Everywhere. A lot of people's heard of Poll Everywhere. It's software that allows you to gather polling questions pretty easily. There's also what's called Top Hat. I use Top Hat in my course, in my undergrad stats course. And so when I show you some examples, they'll all be coming from Top Hat. There's Turning, there's Learning Catalytics, there's Echo 360. All of these different systems have different features and different things that you can use, and it's really a personal preference as to which one you want to use and adopt for your class. But some things you might want to think about when looking at these different systems is, first and foremost, does your university or institution have a license for one of these systems? So institutions across the country right now are adopting licenses for some of these systems, including Vanderbilt. We're going to be adopting a license here next year, hopefully. So if your university does have a license, and I would highly consider using that since it's being paid for, and your students are going to be hopefully familiar with using it because they'll be using it in other classes. Also, you may want to consider the size of your class because Poll Everywhere is free for up to 25 responses per poll. So if you have a small class of 25 or less students, then Poll Everywhere would be a nice way to gather some polling data free of charge. If you have more than 25 students and you still want to use Poll Everywhere, which people do it all the time, you have to pay, and the instructor or the institution has to pay for that license. It is not paid for by the students. That is in contrast to the other systems out there. So Poll Everywhere is a good option, but the other systems provide, like I just said, the option for students to purchase the license. So the instructor does not have to purchase a license. So when I used Top Hat for my class, I didn't pay anything. The students paid a small fee, certainly less than what they would have paid to buy a clicker. And also, Top Hat and these other systems offer more features than just polling. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop. It has a grade book, it has a discussion forum, you can annotate on the lecture notes, you can take attendance. There's just a lot of features that these BYOD response systems have in addition to just polling. And Poll Everywhere has, I believe, the ability to embed a PowerPoint as well, and they're kind of coming up with that. But some of these others offer more features than that. Okay, so teaching statistics with a BYOD response system. So as I mentioned, I use one of these. I use Top Hat in my undergraduate course. My undergraduate course typically has around 60 to 75 students. So there's a healthy amount of students, and I really felt that I couldn't get the interaction I wanted with that level. I was used to teaching smaller courses, so when I taught the larger course, I really wanted some interaction, and I thought Top Hat would provide that to me. So I started using Top Hat, and some things I found that I really like and I really use a lot is, first and foremost, the polling questions. I love the polling questions because it really helps me gauge where people are and their understanding of the material. I also really like the lecture note annotation. So I can write on my lecture notes. It's like a chalkboard, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the discussion forums I use a lot, and I'll talk about how I use those discussion forums. But all of these exist within inside of Top Hat. So I'm just going to show you some screenshots from my class, some classes I've taught in the past. We'll start off with the polling. So if I want to ask a polling question, I'll typically create these polling questions prior to class, and I will embed them in the slides where I want to ask them. You don't have to do this. If you want to create a polling question on the fly, you can. Sometimes I do that if I really feel that students aren't understanding a particular concept and I don't have a polling question to ask them and I want to create that. I can do that pretty quickly, but I typically have them ready to go before class. So this is an example of just computing degrees of freedom for a one-way ANOVA. And so I would ask my students this question. They would see this on their phone, their app on their phone, or on their laptop if they're logged into the Top Hat website. If they don't have their app or they don't have their laptop, but they have their cell phone, they can text. So if you notice, there's a phone number that they can text their answer to as well. Anyway, the point is they get their answer in. This is a multiple choice question. There's other types, and I'll share that with you in a minute, but this is a multiple choice question. And so they text their answer in, and then I can review the results pretty easily. And so for this particular question, I found that 48% of the class answered it correctly, and the other 52% did not. And so this is something I would know that I need to probably spend a little more time on talking about. This is a concept that, you know, less than half the class is getting correct. This is information I would not know if I had not asked this polling question. There's other types of polling questions you can ask. So I use multiple choice a lot. I think it's easy for the students to use multiple choice, but teaching statistics, we get numerical answers. We got a numerical answer here, and we don't have to ask that in multiple choice format. We can certainly have them type that in. So here's computing a probability that I asked my students to do. So they worked on this. They computed the probability with their calculator, and then I asked them to answer numerically, and so they did that, and 62%. This is a little deceiving because some people did not round correctly, so another 15% we can add in there. But you know, there were still some people way off. You know, 0, for instance, is pretty far off here. You know, this is another type of polling question that you can ask that I really like and I use in my statistics class all the time. And then probably my favorite and the coolest of the bunch is one time I did a graph of a scatter plot, and I wanted students to create a scatter plot. So this is something they could not text in. They had to have the app or the computer for, but I just asked them to plot these 4 points on a scatter plot, and what you're looking at is a heat map of the results. And so basically where the red is where most of the people answered, which is where the dots should be. And a couple of people were off a little bit. But I think my students really liked this. It was really cool, and there's probably some other examples that you could use this with. Another feature that I use that I mentioned is a lecture note annotation. I love this for some reason. I use it all the time. And so, you know, sometimes I will leave space in my notes. So this is an example of computing the probability and the standard normal distribution between -1 and 1. And so I left this blank in my notes so that I could draw it out for them and kind of show them where things are coming from, and color code the areas, and they can just watch me go through this in class. So I'm not just presenting something to them and say, here it is. You know, they watch me work through this problem in class. And what's really cool is with Top Hat anyway, they can see what I'm doing real time on their app. So they could be on their phone watching me do all of this. So if a student is sitting in the back and can't see very well, or whatever the situation may be, they can just look at their app or their browser and see what I'm doing. I also like the lecture note annotation. You know, this is kind of a designed drawing and example, but sometimes I'll be teaching and a student will ask me a question, and I want to show them a graph or do something. And here at Vanderbilt, a lot of times in our classrooms, the projector screen is over the chalkboard. So it's really hard to, you know, unless you want to waste a lot of time having the screen go up and down. So this is another situation, and also this is something they can look back on. So once they leave class, they can go back and they can see what I've done in class. So as they're studying and preparing for their midterms, they can look back at what was done in class. So I embed the PowerPoints into Top Hat. So these are PowerPoints that I've uploaded into Top Hat. Finally, I use a discussion forum. And I use a discussion forum for a couple of different things. Every class period, every lecture, I open a discussion forum for students to ask me questions. They can ask me any type of question about the material, or if they want me to expand upon something. And I really like this because there's a lot of students that don't want to raise their hand. I mean, I still have students that raise their hand and, you know, that don't mind to, but I always have a few that don't want to, and they would rather just type it in, and they do that. So here's some examples of some questions students asked. And so, you know, during lecture, I'll look at this. I'll go back and, you know, about halfway through lecture, and I'll see, you know, I'll see what they've asked, and I'll answer it. And then I'll go home, and you can always, you can't see here, but you can comment. You can comment as well. So I'll comment and type in the answers as well, or if I don't have time in class to do that. Also, students can like. My students didn't use it, but they can like. You know, so if you have somebody that, if you have a question that has like 15 likes on it, you know that you need to answer that one in class. I also use the discussion forum for course feedback. So if you notice here, it doesn't tell you who asked the questions. It says hidden. So I hide who's asking the questions so students don't feel like if they have to ask multiple questions that other students are thinking bad of them or something, or if their question is something they're embarrassed about. But I can see who's writing the questions, because I tried it where it was anonymous for me too, and that didn't work very well. I got some comments about my shoes. So anyway, we went ahead and changed that to where I can see, and I tell my students this, I can see, so don't be goofy. You know, I can see who's writing what. But when I have them leave course feedback, this is a discussion forum I leave up through the whole class, through the whole semester. They can go in at any time and leave comments about my class. That is anonymous to me, and they have to trust me on that, and they do, because I can tell by what they leave. You know, they leave me course feedback, and a lot of times it's very helpful stuff that they may have not felt comfortable with saying to my face or emailing me, but that's very useful and helpful for them. So in conclusion, the BYOD response system is an alternative to clickers. It's a way for instructors to get data from students about how they understand polling questions. And some of these response systems have more features than polling that I've mentioned. My student feedback has been absolutely positive. I have not had much negative feedback about my use of Top Hat, even though students have to pay, you know, $30 or so to get it. Hopefully that won't be the case in the future. And students seem to benefit from the interactive nature of the response system. So, thank you. Oh, yeah, so the drawing you do from your computer or like a tablet, so with the stylus, so you do it from, yeah, you do it, I used to do it on my tablet a lot, and then I got lazy from bringing my tablet to class, so I just do it on the computer, yeah, with the mouse, yeah. If it's not, the one I showed you was not on that, but yeah. But if it's something very simple, I'll do it with the mouse, yeah. Yep.
Does Top Hat play nicely with Blackboard or Sakai? You guys work about that?
You know, I haven't done much of that because pretty much everything, so I use, my whole course is in Top Hat. So I upload assignments to Top Hat. You can create folders, everything. I will say this, I use the gradebook in Blackboard because I like it a little bit better than Top Hat's gradebook. I use Top Hat's gradebook only to get attendance and polling, because it's, To make this work, you really need to count the polling as part of the grade, so students take it seriously. I don't count for accuracy, I count just for the fact that they're there and participating. And so Top Hat gives me that score that I then export and import into Blackboard. I'm not so sure they directly talk with each other. You could do your whole class inside and not use Blackboard. Yep.